Hey guys, I'm Whitney, a personal injury attorney on a mission to help you make safer and more informed decisions about beauty. After representing women harmed by dangerous cosmetic products and procedures, I have realized that the beauty industry is full of dangerous risks and side effects that are unknown and not talked about enough. On each episode, we'll dive into all the latest beauty trends and discuss how we can stay safe in a sea of potions and procedures promising youth and beauty. We will explore real-life stories, legal insights, and advice from the experts. From Botox to BBLs to toxic products in your makeup bag, we're going to talk about it all. My goal is for you to leave every episode with the information that you need to stay safe, beautiful, and informed. You're listening to the Beauty Justice Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of the Beauty Justice Podcast. Today, we are talking about one of my most requested topics, which is Botox. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I've been a little hesitant to really start researching and looking into Botox and really kind of going down this road because I myself have been getting Botox injections since I was probably 28 or 29 years old. I've been, I would say, maybe putting my head in the sand a little bit as to what is actually in Botox and what the actual risks. But I've been, like I said, getting asked so much about Botox. Is it safe? Is Botox toxic? I think we can all probably guess just by the name Botox that yes, it is toxic. I am really excited today to have our guest on. I have with us today Ray Chester. He is a double board certified trial attorney who practices in the state of Texas. And he has gone up against some of the biggest product manufacturers in the country, including Allergan, who is the manufacturer of Botox. He's one of the only attorneys in the country who has successfully obtained verdicts and settlements for numerous people who have been harmed by Botox. Even though I'm a little bit hesitant about this conversation, and some of you listeners out there might be going, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to listen to this, for better or for worse, and whether or not we want to hear this information, Ray, I am so excited to have you here on the show. So welcome to the Beauty Justice Podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I want to start off, I have so many questions for you and so many things related to Botox that I want to talk about. But I thought we could start off by hearing a little bit about your client, Dr. Helton, and about your case against Botox. So can you just kind of give us a little bit of background on that case, about what happened to her and what happened with your case?
Charlotte Helton is a very dear friend of mine to this day. She's a remarkable woman. She grew up in Oklahoma City, put herself through undergrad and medical school, graduated at the top of her class. She's an OBGYN. When we would walk around the streets of Oklahoma City before her trial and after, it seemed like about every third person we would run into would come running up to her and hug her because she delivered their baby. She's just a great lady. Is a co-founder and owner of the first women's hospital in Oklahoma. She's married with children, very successful children, very successful husband who's also a physician. Super great lady. But she got some Botox cosmetic injections in her early 40s. She had 2 sessions. Nothing happened in the first one, but after the second session, she quickly developed, within a day or two, generalized weakness and could not get out of bed. She went to a lot of doctors. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. She finally went to Washington and went through a 3-day protocol at NIH, the National Institute of Health, and they determined that her problems were botulism caused by the Botox injection. They call that iatrogenic botulism. Iatrogenic is a term that just means medication-induced.
Were they able to, reverse the botulism? Were they able to treat her? What happened after she started to experience those symptoms?
Her weakness lessened a little bit, but she has never fully recovered. She also developed a very painful and crippling peripheral neuropathy, which is nerve pain in your hands and your feet. She was unable to do surgeries or deliver babies. she ended up having to give up her medical practice.
So this is, a really scary situation and a scary set of risks. And I think that a lot of people would be probably shocked to know that this is something that can happen from getting these injections. I can tell you, like I said, I've been getting them for years. And until I really started to do some research recently, and also in preparing for, speaking to you today, I can tell you that no provider has ever told me really anything about this. I'm sure it's somewhere in the consent paperwork that gets signed, but to know that this type of outcome can happen is really scary. And it's something that I think a lot of people are going to be shocked when they learn about this. At the time, Dr. Helton approached you with her situation and her case. Were the black box warnings on Botox at that time? What time period are we talking about when this case started for you?
The black box warning, which is the most serious warning in the United States that the FDA requires only for the most dangerous drugs, that went on the product in 2009. I was one of the people who lobbied the FDA and supplied them information supporting that black box. And we tried Charlotte Helton's case in 2010, but she was injected before the black box warning was on the product. Most of the Botox cases that I handled were pre-black box warning, at least when the patient got the injection.
And my understanding, in doing a little bit of research about some of the cases that you've handled, is that you've handled both cosmetic-related Botox cases and then also therapeutic Botox cases. Is that correct?
Right. Actually, the great majority of the cases were therapeutic, which is another way of saying for medical uses as opposed to cosmetic. It's approved for a few narrow uses, but it's used off-label for everything. Excessive sweating, back problems, neck problems, spasticity, stuff that you wouldn't even believe they use it for. In the medical or therapeutic uses, it typically have higher doses than cosmetic and therefore have much higher risk.
In terms of the therapeutic cases that you handled, can you tell us about some of those?
The most serious ones were children born with cerebral palsy that have pediatric spasticity, which is a very serious problem. And Botox does effectively treat pediatric spasticity temporarily, but the doses required to effectively treat pediatric spasticity in the large muscles of the limbs are approaching toxic levels. And there are thousands of deaths and serious injuries to these compromised children worldwide as a result of Botox use. So several of my cases have involved children who died or suffered some other horrible thing, seizure disorders. Botox can cause seizure disorders. Another class of Botox cases going wrong is that Botox can trigger an immune response in the body and trigger an autoimmune disease. One of the most common ones caused by Botox that's very frequently reported is a disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a serious and progressive neuromuscular disease. It's very similar to ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. I've also had cases where Botox got into the brain and caused comas and death.
One thing, there's a lot of things in there that you just said that I want to go back to, but the one thing that stood out to me when I started kind of researching into this is the potential for an autoimmune response. And, I'm sitting here thinking about so many friends that I know who have autoimmune diseases. I mean, there's so many different autoimmune disorders out there. There's a whole spectrum, and so many of my friends, and I have one friend in particular that I'm thinking of who has a really serious autoimmune disorder, and she gets cosmetic Botox injections. And, I'm just thinking, does she have any idea that, there is this potential risk for, I guess, the Botox kind of causing more inflammation in your system and sparking these autoimmune responses. So that's something that's, I was really shocked when I learned that. And I don't think that's something that anybody really knows about and that they're being warned about when people are going in and getting screened. I guess not really screened. I don't think people really get screened before they're given Botox, but when you're just kind of going in and filling out the paperwork beforehand, I would think that that's something that the provider should probably be asking really in depth about, your background with autoimmune disorders and things like that. And I just don't think that that's being done. And I don't think that people really know about that as a potential risk. So going back to what you were talking about in terms of the therapeutic uses typically require a higher dosage. So you're being given more units of the product, right? Can you kind of explain to us, I guess, how the different units are measured? Like, how is the dosing for Botox? How is that measured? How do they come up with the dose?
Right. I think this is probably the most important thing to take away from this interview that people don't know about. And a lot of the doctors and nurses and beauticians that inject Botox under the supervision of a doctor have no idea what I'm getting ready to tell you, but this is absolutely fact. Botox is short for botulinum toxin. Botulinum toxin is derived from botulism, which is the most serious form of food poisoning. It's the most potent neurotoxin on Earth. 1 gram can kill 1 million people if properly dispersed.
Wow.
It was originally developed as a biological weapon. Saddam Hussein had stores of it in the Gulf War, and therefore all of our troops that went overseas in the Gulf War were vaccinated against botulinum toxin. If any of those former troops ever wanted to get Botox injections, it wouldn't work on them because they've been vaccinated against them. Botulinum toxin is a very, very lethal neurotoxin. The dose of Botox is unique among medications. Medications are typically measured in terms of weight or volume, cc's, milligrams, things like that. Botox is just commonly referred to in terms of units. Nobody knows what a unit is. It's a very amorphous term. Well, I'll tell you what a unit is. And this is actually in the package insert if you read it. It's about 5 pages, tiny print. It would take you forever to get through it. But if you do get through it, you'll find out that a unit of Botox is a mouse unit, and more specifically, it's the LD50 for a mouse. And the LD50 is a toxicological term, meaning the lethal dose in 50% of mice injected. On average, it's how much it takes to kill a mouse. Now, to put that in context, I don't know how many units you usually get, but the typical cosmetic injection is anywhere from 50 up to 100 units all over the face. That's well over the FDA-approved unit dosage for cosmetic. It's only approved for 20 units in the forehead and 20 units in crow's feet, but it's typically injected at higher doses all over the face. So if you go in and get 60 units, which is a typical cosmetic dose, getting enough injected into your face to kill 60 mice.
Wow. That is a little bit terrifying. Yeah, I mean, I for sure can say that, I have never had anyone explain units of Botox in that manner. I was listening to another interview that you gave, and you said something like, even some of the doctors and some of the experts that you had put on the witness stand, when you asked them questions about that, they also had no idea that was, how the units of Botox were measured. Is that accurate?
Right. Plastic surgeons that have been injecting 10 or 15 years and that injected my client, when I either took their deposition or called them as a witness at trial and explained to them what a unit was and showed them in the package insert, the reactions I got were quite interesting and shocking. And it's just embarrassing that a medical professional would not know what exactly they're injecting into the patient. Now, I will say that the manufacturer of Botox, and there's other botulinum toxin products made by other manufacturers, but they certainly don't advertise what a unit is, and they indoctrinate the doctors to think it's totally safe. And so it really all stems from the manufacturer covering up the dangers. But yeah, most doctors don't even know what a Botox unit is.
Wow. And that's, that's really scary, because what happens, I do product liability cases, but more in the asbestos world. And, we have this thing called the learned intermediary doctrine, where the product manufacturers basically, once they turn the product over to the medical professional or the, whoever the person is that they're selling the actual product to, then as long as they have properly warned this intermediary, then it's on the intermediary to warn the actual end user of the product. And so, when you're sitting here telling me that the medical professionals who are injecting these products don't even know this information, I'm sitting here going, okay, well then how can any patient ever actually give fully proper informed consent if the doctors don't even know, they don't even know the information. They haven't fully read the pamphlets or the inserts. That's a really big problem. And so in terms of, the Botox, kind of where they stand now, are you even able to bring a suit against them anymore because they have put these warnings on the products, and, are they insulated from suit? Or is it still possible to bring a case against them if you get injured?
Impossible is a big word, but it's close to impossible to sue a manufacturer. All of the cases that I had, the successful cases, well, not all of them, but almost all of them, were people that were injected before the black box warning came out. And those are, of course, as you know, failure to warn cases. And you have to show that if the doctor was warned, as you're referring to the learned intermediary defense, that would have changed the outcome. Some states allow you to succeed if you can just prove that the doctor would have warned the patient and the patient would have declined the treatment. But putting the black box warning on the product has largely served to insulate the manufacturer from liability. There's a few exceptions for off-label use and other things, but largely they're insulated, which is really unfair because the black box warning is on the package insert. If you get a bottle of pills, it's going to have this little folded up piece of paper attached to it. That's the package insert. That's the way the FDA does the whole warning system for pharmaceutical products, is the package insert. So nobody really reads the little paper attached to the pill bottle. With Botox, it's even worse because it comes in a vial. The package insert is in the box where the vial is. A vial has a tiny, tiny speck of botulinum toxin. I mean, it's so small you can't see it. It's in nanograms. If you just imagine if 1 gram can kill 1 million people, then you can imagine how much. Most vials have 100 units in them, and it's a tiny speck. And so a nurse or a doctor puts saline in the vial with the speck of Botox, shakes it up, and draws it up into the syringe, comes in the room and gives you the shot. So you never even see the package insert. So it's a very flawed system. The FDA took the unusual step with Botox of not only requiring a black box warning, but requiring a medication guide. And that is a piece of paper that's supposed to go directly to the consumer, to the patient, and it has the same warnings as the black box warning. I don't have any exact numbers for you, but I'll tell you that the majority of patients never see the medication guide for one reason or another. If they do see it, it's attached to the back of the informed consent paperwork. And even I don't read the informed consent paperwork when I go to the doctor. I don't have time you know. So the warning system is incredibly ineffective, but it has served to largely insulate Allergan from liability. I don't take Botox cases anymore. There's some other reasons for that I could go into later, but yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. So something that I want to go back to before we move on is, when we were talking about the units of Botox, you said that the FDA approved amount is only how many units?
For cosmetic, it's 40 total, 20 in the forehead, 20 in crow's feet.
Okay. When I read that, I was really shocked. And I think a lot of people would also be shocked to hear that. And the reason is, the longer time goes on, I'm seeing that there's more and more places now where they're telling us we should be injecting Botox. So, they kind of start out and it's like, oh, you just need it for your forehead lines. Then they start to give it to you around the eyes. Then, as you start to get a little bit older, they're like, oh, actually, you got to treat these lines. Now we got to treat these lines. They are using it for the masseter muscle, which I know that can be considered a therapeutic use for people that have, teeth grinding and TMJ. But for a lot of people, it's really just being given for cosmetic purposes because everybody wants that kind of slimmed jawline that it can give you. They're doing it in the nose now. You can get a Botox nose makeover. If you're getting your entire face treated in one setting, I mean, that's putting you well over the FDA approved amount of units. And nobody's being told that. No one is ever going to say that. The providers aren't going to say, just by the way, I want to let you know, I'm giving you X amount over the FDA approved limit here. That's something that's alarming. Something else that I have been seeing, and it really kind of went wild, I would say last year when the Barbie movie came out, is this form of Botox that they're calling Barbie Botox. And it's basically trap tox. They're putting the Botox into people's trapezius muscles to relax them. And that is something that is being used for therapeutic purposes in some instances, but the way that it was really being advertised is Barbie Talks, you're going to get this, slimmed neck effect. And I actually went to look up because I was just curious, how many units of Botox does it take to get that slimming effect in your neck and your shoulders? And I read that they can give you anywhere from 25 to 100 units on each side. So, you're just thinking somebody going in for cosmetic Botox and, if you're getting all this stuff done at the same time and they're hitting every spot on your face and maybe you're, doing the trap talks and all these other things, I mean, you're really getting a lot of units. And so I think it's just, again, it goes back to informed consent and people are not being told that your risk of botulism and botulism poisoning goes up, the higher amount of units and the higher the dose that you receive. Going back to your client, Dr. Helton, you mentioned that she had Botox done and nothing happened, and then she went back a second time and had it done. Was there any indication in her case that she was given, how many units she was given, or were the two times, was it really close in time where she went and then went back? Can you give us a little more information about what happened in her situation?
I certainly can. And I want to circle back to some other things you mentioned about FDA approval and the Barbie shots and everything. There's a lot of context there that's important. But Dr. Helton received typical cosmetic doses, 50 or 60 units, both times in the upper face. So there was nothing unusual about it. So Botox is injected into muscles. That's what it's intended to do. And it destroys the neuromuscular junction, which is the connection between nerves and muscles. It's how the brain tells the muscle to move. When I say destroys, I mean it literally destroys your nerve endings at your neuromuscular junction, so your muscle doesn't work. So if you stick it in your forehead and a muscle there, then that muscle's not going to work. That's how Botox works. The reason it only lasts 2 to 4 months is not so much that it wears off, is that your body repairs itself. It repairs the neuromuscular junction by growing new nerve endings around the destroyed portion, reconnecting with the muscle, and then the muscle starts to work again within 2 to 4 months. And then you get another injection, and it destroys your neuromuscular junction again, and the process repeats. You can just imagine that if you get, say, Botox injections every 3 months in the same place over and over and over, you just keep destroying that neuromuscular junction. The nerves keep growing around it. Nobody's really done any studies on what that does, but it can't really be good. Where people have problems, most of the cosmetic injections, people don't have problems from, the majority of them. It's fairly low dose, and, most of them are fine. You're fine. But, and not always, because what happens is if the botulinum toxin gets outside the muscle and into the bloodstream, if you have botulinum toxin in your bloodstream, that is by definition botulism. And there's two main ways it can get in your bloodstream. One is if they miss the muscle, because they're just doing it by feel. And these muscles in your face are tiny. Sometimes with children, when they're using very high doses, they'll inject under EMG guidance to make sure they're in the muscle. But they don't do that for cosmetic. They don't do that for 90% of all injections. The other way that it can get in your bloodstream is if they inject too much in a muscle, it just literally overflows and gets in your bloodstream. So that's where the problems come. But if you're ready, I'd like to circle back to how this FDA approval for the 40 units and other indications, how that was established.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Allergan's plan from the beginning has been to seek FDA approval for certain very narrow uses at small doses, and then they aggressively market it for off-label use. Off-label use means not approved by the FDA. Marketing for off-label use is illegal. Allergan has been prosecuted by the United States government in criminal and civil prosecutions. They paid a $600 million fine for off-label promotion. Hasn't really slowed them down any. The original approved cosmetic dose was only 20 units, and then Allergan worked very hard for years to get that bumped up. The way that process works is they do clinical trials, and then they see how effective it is, and then they see how many side effects there are, and then the FDA determines, okay, this is the maximum safe dose we're going to allow. So that 40 units for cosmetic isn't some arbitrary number. That's the maximum that the FDA determined was safe enough to justify the benefits that you get from it. I'm not a big Barbie fan. I hadn't heard about the trap injections, but I could tell you some stuff that's even weirder than that.
Tell us.
Those are not approved by the FDA. The main therapeutic use that it first was approved for was an extremely rare medical condition called cervical dystonia. That's where a person's head is permanently kind of locked to the side because of muscle dysfunction. And now it's approved for migraines and a few other things, spasticity, but it's certainly not approved for trap use. The most unusual one that I heard of back in the day, I don't know that they're still doing this, was, forgive my language here, but it was called the Botox boob job. They would inject your pec muscles, and then your back muscles were still working, so they would draw you back like this, and it would have the effect of making your chest stick out. Totally not approved, very unsafe. Horrible idea.
Wow. On the same token as the Botox boob job, I actually just learned that there is something called there's a lot of providers that are marketing Botox. So they're really trying to get men on the whole Botox train. But it's called Scrotox, and they are actually injecting Botox into the scrotum to get rid of those wrinkles. So that was something that I was a little surprised to hear about.
It's been used for anal fissures. It's been used for urinary incontinence. And as a man who's knowledgeable about botulinum toxin, I certainly wouldn't want to get injected, anywhere down there for any reason with Botox.
Just, there's some of these things where you're like, okay, I get it. And then some things you're like, do we really need to be doing that? I don't know if anybody cares, or, I don't know. Maybe if, I don't know. Maybe if you're, I don't know. I don't know why that would be necessary, but, yeah, there's all of these different off-label, uses going on. And, I think with everything, we just really need to know the information and, be able to weigh the risks and the benefits and just understand what we're putting in and on our bodies. I think what you just said about Allergan actually pleading guilty to criminal charges for, the off-label marketing is just something that's really crazy. And like you said, I don't think there's been any slowdown in, all of these other off-label uses for Botox that they're coming out with. And, you kind of have to think that those ideas are coming from somewhere. I don't think they've really stopped this off-label marketing. So
I can give you some examples of that. The most egregious example is prior to a couple of years ago, there were no Botox approvals for any pediatric use of any kind, but they were very aggressively marketing it to pediatric neurologists and other specialists who treat children with cerebral palsy. There was an organization, a nonprofit organization known as We Move. I believe it was an acronym. I don't know what it stood for, but it was for parents of children with cerebral palsy. And they put out, it was like a support group, and they put out newsletters and stuff. Well, Allergan came up with a plan to co-op, basically take over We Move by injecting massive amounts of money into it. And they started having We Move publish articles about how great Botox was for pediatric spasticity when it wasn't even approved for that. And we would go to pediatric clinics and find that the Botox sales reps had been calling on them, once a week for 10 years. They take the doctors out for trips and dinners, and they bring dinner for the whole staff. And then some of these kids were getting seriously injured and actually killed by megadoses of Botox. But this was Allergan's plan. They do the same thing in the cosmetic arena. There's an outfit called Advanced Aesthetics that appears to be a nonprofit group for estheticians and other people to improve people's looks. And that got co-opted by Allergan as well. And they put out a lot of information on using Botox all over the face. It's kind of implied in what I was saying earlier, but Botox injections around the mouth area, the cheeks, the jawbones, the neck, none of that's approved. None of that's approved. They haven't proved that the efficacy is worth the health risks.
Wow. That was an area that I actually left off earlier. I forgot about is the necks. I've been seeing, they'll inject it all into your neck bands, and, they do all kinds of things. And that was another one that I looked up that actually requires sometimes a higher dosage in order to achieve, the results that they want with that. So, I think that something a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of the industry, like the studies that they rely on and the publications and all of these things oftentimes are controlled by these companies that are making the products and selling them. The medical device manufacturers or the drug manufacturers, they're involved in these organizations, and they are pumping tons of money into the research that is ultimately what the entire industry ends up relying on. So, you have all of these providers that are shouting from the rooftops that these things are safe, and they're relying on studies and evidence that is the manufacturer of the product is actually paying to have that information put out there. So I think, that's something that people really need to keep in mind, and that's across all industries, but especially, in this arena, we just need to know where this information is coming from.
Contrary to the stories that are being funded by the manufacturers now about how safe it is, their own research early on in the animal studies, there was one study in particular where they injected monkeys with the same doses they were recommending for pediatric spasticity, and literally half the monkeys died. And they came up with all kinds of reasons about maybe they were just sick or something like that. But the data out there is horrifying, and Allergan has had many, many problems and adverse events reported in their own clinical trials. That's kept them from getting FDA approval in many of these other areas. And then the other thing is, I'm sure you're familiar with the adverse event reporting system worldwide, and there are thousands or tens of thousands of adverse events, including deaths, being reported to Botox, being reported to the FDA and the European equivalent of the FDA regarding Botox. I also want to talk to you when you're ready about fillers, because it's a related topic.
Yes, fillers. That's probably a whole separate episode there. We could talk about that in a second. I want to just ask you really quickly about there was a recent warning that just came out from the CDC about Botox injections, and the warning, I thought when I read it, was a little bit cryptic, but basically everyone is spreading this warning around right now saying that there are these counterfeit Botox injections, and that it's the counterfeit Botox that is causing, this case of reports of women that are getting sick with botulism-like symptoms. When I first heard about it, I was kind of like, because the counterfeit drugs, I mean, that is a big issue and a big problem. But when I read the actual language of the warning from the CDC, the actual heading of it says adverse effects linked to counterfeit or mishandled botulism toxin injections. And then when I read the whole thing, it seemed like these women are having symptoms. Again, they're calling them botulism-like, but it's like these definitely sound like they're having symptoms of botulism poisoning. And just the whole language of this warning to me seemed like they were trying everything to avoid saying that some of these could potentially be from actual name brand botulism toxin products. So that was just something, and I don't know if you had seen that warning or heard about it, but that's something that's been floating around, and to me it just seems a little, like they're dancing around. Nobody wants to actually say that it's real Botox or real Dysport that is causing these cases to be reported. So, and you're saying that there's tons of cases where they are being reported to the FDA.
I haven't seen that particular warning, but I'll add some color around that. The CDC maintains an antitoxin for botulism and for Botox overdoses. Unfortunately, it has to be ordered by a doctor, and it's only effective within the first 2 or 3 days after your injection. So it's rarely very helpful, but that should be warned against too. I mean, if you're getting Botox, if you're getting any medication, and you go, oh, by the way, if you develop botulism, the CDC has an antitoxin. That alone should tell you something. This reminds me of, there was a famous case in the early 2000s where some doctor down in Florida got a hold of some fake Botox or I think he made it himself. You could actually make it from botulism. And it turned out to be much stronger than because you can imagine how hard it is to develop a unit because you have to kill a lot of mice, right? He didn't go through any of that. So he injected him and two of his friends. They all developed severe botulism. They had to go on a ventilator. That's what happens if you get severe botulism, either from food poisoning or from Botox overdoses. Your whole muscles of your whole body shut down. You have to go on a ventilator. And Allergan really geared up their PR campaign to show that was counterfeit Botox. That doesn't really happen with Botox, which was sort of true, but it's the same substance. He just injected more than he intended.
Lots to think about here in terms of, whether or not this is something that we should be injecting into our faces and all over our bodies for all of these other uses. Really quickly, let's just touch on the filler, and then we'll try and wrap up because we've been talking for a while now, and I know you're a busy guy and you got lots of things to do. So what do you want us to know about filler?
I mainly wanted to contrast fillers from Botox. I live in an affluent neighborhood in Austin, Texas, and I know a lot of people that get cosmetic injections and fillers also in their face. And people tend to conflate the two. And what I really want people to know is that they're completely separate things. Botulinum toxin is a neurotoxin that destroys your neuromuscular junction and makes your muscle not work. Fillers are safer, much safer. Most of them are based on hyaluronic acid, which is a natural occurring substance in the body. And they're used to change the contour of your face, and they put in your lips and everything else. As you can see, I haven't done anything to improve my looks, but if you're talking about people just think Botox and fillers is all the same thing. It's really not. Fillers has a much different risk profile and is not as dangerous.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that because from my perspective and experience, I actually think more people are afraid of getting the fillers than they are the Botox. And I think, we hear and we see all these scary videos online where people experience like a vascular occlusion from filler, and they see pictures of people with their faces rotting off and, some of the really scary things that can happen from filler injections. But I've never heard anyone say that Botox is actually the riskier treatment. So I think that's really an interesting.
I'm not advocating using fillers for cosmetic use. I'm just saying that they're more or less an inert substance. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of things can go wrong. Brazilian butt lift, for example, I try and tell people in 10 years, it may look like you pooped your pants or something. So, you might want to keep that in mind. Botox is not the same as a filler, and it has a completely different action and a completely different risk profile. So I just wanted people to know that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. I think that a lot of people are going to be going out and doing some additional research after this. And I just really appreciate you coming on here today and giving us all of this information. And maybe we'll talk again down the road about some other interesting topics. So thank you so much for being here.
Just remember that one cosmetic injection session, the odds are in your favor, but it's only going to last 3 months. So what's your long-term plan? Are you going to get it every 3 months for the rest of your life? If so, the risk of something going wrong goes up quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. That's all I ask.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you want more content like this, please follow me on Instagram @BeautyJusticeWit. And if you've been injured by a cosmetic product or procedure and you want to learn about your legal rights, please visit my website, beautyjustice.com and sign up for a free case evaluation.